problem is that we don't really teach our leaders very well. I mean, you think about most MBA programs, even top, Masters of Business Administration, they might
Mhm.
get a class in leadership, maybe. So most of us pick up our leadership by watching the other people around us.
Yeah.
Now, if the people you're watching aren't using cognitive empathy and don't know what it is, then
Mhm.
how are you going to learn that? There's not much in the literature about it. It's something that people aren't really, we've been talking about empathy a lot for about the last 10 years, but actually understanding there are different kinds. I mean, this is something that's super brand new.
Mhm.
So, leaders aren't necessarily going to come to the table with these skills. But I
Uh-huh.
use the word skills for a reason.
Yeah.
Learning cognitive empathy is a skill. It's not something you're
Okay.
born with. It's something you can practice and build.
Hi, Melissa. I've been wondering from the several conversations I've had with different levels of leadership, right? That when it comes to taking tough, rational decisions where it's a zero or one situation, right? Um, I have to be tough. I don't have space for thinking about the other person's emotions or having space or time to be empathetic, right? But
Mhm.
you've been talking a little differently about this whole situation. How does this usually pan out where a leader is sitting here in a very dynamic state and they're thinking about, okay, I have to take this decision now. I don't have time to be thinking about emotions. But then what's going wrong?
Well, well, I think the first thing is that that leader has the wrong definition of empathy because empathy is not just about feelings. Empathy is about perspective taking. So if you're going to jump in and make a decision, especially an important one, without
Mm-hmm.
first understanding the perspective of the people that this is going to affect, you could have this blow up in your face in a
Yeah.
very real way. So it's actually in their best interest first to disconnect from this idea that it's about feelings. There's
Yeah.
43 different definitions of empathy. Only one deals specifically with feelings.
Uh-huh.
So first we need to understand what it actually is, and second we need to leverage it effectively to be able to get the best out of the people whose perspective we're taking, whether it's board members or stakeholders or employees. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think leaders can afford not to use it.
Mm-hmm. That's true, right? I mean, when there are multiple stakeholders involved, and if you have to deal with a specific stakeholder, you have to be taking their perspective in their perspective in perspective, right? But then,
Yep.
when it comes to business, right, you're taking a very tough decision of, say, cutting out people per se.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that the most simple thing that you can think of, right, at this point, when you have people
Yeah.
involved. So there is obviously when we talk about people, we have to be considerate and have their perspective. Yeah, what will their future plans be and what will it look like and how easy can we make it for them to leave? But then it's not how lucrative is it for business that is the pros and cons weighing that the leader has to do, right? From their personal angle. So how do you
Yeah.
suggest going about for that?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to understand that having empathy doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. So if you are using so much of what people think is empathy, taking oh, I'm so sorry for how you're feeling. We can't lay these people off, even though it's going to sink the company.
Yeah.
That's not empathy. That's being a
Uh-huh.
pushover. They're two different things. And that's something that leaders miss. Business has to get done. And
Yes.
that means that tough decisions have to be made. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that you just rush in and blindly and in a way that's tone deaf start just, cutting people and really not caring. It has to be something where you're taking into consideration the whole, and that's part of being a leader. I mean, if being a leader were easy, everyone would be doing it. So, it is hard and it is a sticky place to be as a leader, but that's
Yeah.
why you've taken on the responsibility of a leadership position.
Mm-hmm. And building from that, right, when we've taken that responsibility, um, I mean, I've read it multiple places and a lot of people have also said it, right, that even to become a leader, you have to have been through phases where you have displayed empathy because otherwise people would not be in a position to actually look at you as a leader and put you in that position, right? Otherwise, being tough
Yeah.
doesn't get you places.
Yeah. Well, the thing is a lot of people make it into leadership positions not because they're the best leader. They make it there because they're the best technician, because they pull in the biggest contracts, because they have the highest paid clients.
Hmm.
So that means that a lot of times by the people get into these leadership positions, they know they're lacking those skills, which
Hmm.
means now they're trying to take on these leadership responsibilities while dealing with imposter syndrome,
Hmm.
while understanding that maybe they don't understand how to effectively leverage empathy, while knowing that they have these pieces that are missing. And unfortunately, because of that, they miss the biggest and most important type of empathy, in my opinion, and that's self-empathy, which is
Hmm.
why you end up with so many leaders with burnout and empathy
Yeah.
fatigue and substance abuse problems and family problems. I mean,
Hmm.
empathy is so all encompassing. It isn't just what you do for other people. It's
Yeah.
also something that you do for yourself. And these leaders that are super driven, really highly self-actualized, really want to, be motivated and go do it. Sometimes self-empathy is what they're lacking the most.
Okay, but okay, you're right that if you're not thinking about yourself and not putting yourself in the picture, right, you're losing out, and that's where what's leading to burnout, as you mentioned, right? But
Mhm.
then as you mentioned that they are all there because they are excellent performers. The metric in with which people are promoted to say positions of leadership per se, should we be relooking at those, right? Because not every performer or say every analyst is made out to become a partner, right? If I could.
Right. Yeah,
So probably
absolutely. No.
should we be looking at the metrics once again rather than just promoting high performers? We let them be high performers at wherever they are, and then we look at people who are actually managing people.
Yes and no. Metrics are sticky, you're right? Because
Yeah,
you're dealing with data where the numbers look like they're very clean and very, this is the yes and
objective.
no, black and white. Right. But at the beginning and the end of the day, people are involved in these metrics, how they're collected, what's collected, how it's applied.
Hmm.
So I think metrics are something that we can look at. Metrics are definitely something that can be taken into consideration.
Hmm.
But in this age of big tech and big data and I think the big thing to really look at and understand is what the human to human connection is. Because it's the more we deal with things that have no human connection, that can't have human connection, like AI, it can't have empathy, it can't take perspective. The
Hmm.
more the people that are able to successfully leverage this human to human connection are going to be the ones that can set themselves apart as leaders. And it's very hard to have metrics that can measure that.
Uh-huh. Okay, since we're talking about AI, this question just floated up, right? What I want to know is that now we have something, we have a tool, if you want to call it a tool, that can probably
Mhm.
look beyond just numbers, right? A little beyond. You said that it cannot take empathy, but obviously it can take a little perspective based on the data that feeding it, right? And now it can give you a little more analysis or something of that sort, like an intern would. But then you have more subjective view. You have the ability to look at data a little more subjectively rather than just as objectively as we look at it, right? From a metric perspective, as we were talking about. So, is it
Right.
possible to scale these tools and look at it from that perspective? I mean, I don't know if it fits.
Yeah. So first, I'd be really careful with the definition of some of those words. Just
Mhm.
because people get them mixed up. It's not just
Yeah,
you or me. It's like everybody.
yeah, that's right.
So AI is definitely a powerful forecaster. It
Hmm.
can pull things in and forecast what's coming, but it doesn't take perspective. It
Hmm.
can't. It's not possible because it's pulling from stuff that's already there. So
Yeah.
I mean, as a tool and as a forecaster, yeah, it's dynamite. To take perspective of humans and how we function, it's
Of course
terrible.
not.
That's
Yeah.
why we're having so much trouble with AI in therapy and AI in mental health. And,
Hmm.
I mean, there's been some suicides and stuff, and it's because it doesn't understand the human condition. It really
Hmm.
doesn't, So I think AI is an incredibly powerful tool. And I think we do the best with it when we actually leverage it for what it's good for instead
Right.
of thinking of it as a person. I think
Hmm.
that's where we get things mixed up sometimes because it's not
Yeah,
a person, it's a tool.
that's right. Yeah, that's why I said, right, it's a tool and we should be using it like one. Um,
Yes.
Now, since we're talking about leadership and human-to-human connection, right? One thing that leaders are usually very good at is building this human-to-human connection and creating this whole network of people, right? Who are either influenced by them or
Yeah.
who they are influenced by, right? And this human-to-human
Yeah.
connection generally stems from good sympathy, empathy, and trying to relate to one another, right? If there's one tip that you want to share with leaders out there, probably which 99% of them are getting wrong when it comes to this networking and having empathy in your network, what would that be?
To keep in mind that there's more than one kind of empathy. And if you don't use all
Hmm.
of them, or at least what I call the big three, that you're
Okay.
losing out. So there's emotional empathy, which is the feeling. It's usually
Yeah.
very fast. It's instinctive. But there's
Yeah.
a second kind that's called cognitive empathy. And
Okay.
that, means I logically understand what's going on with you, but I don't feel anything. And it's slower, it's more iterative, and it lends itself to a business situation because you're actually thinking
Hmm.
about all of the different ramifications and the perspective of large groups of people and that sort of thing. And leaders tend to leave that one out because they don't know about it. We're not taught
Hmm.
about it. So without emotional empathy, cognitive empathy, and self empathy, you're not
Hmm.
using the complete tool. And that's where people miss productivity, profit, and innovation that they could be using these tools to build.
Okay. And what was the third one?
Uh, of empathy,
Yeah.
there's emotional empathy, which is the feeling one.
Yeah.
There's cognitive empathy, which is the logical one. And there's self empathy, which is what we
All
were talking
right.
about earlier,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
actually being able to have empathy and then compassion for yourself.
Okay. Now, let's talk about cognitive empathy because it's just new for me and I want to learn more about it. Probably the one who's
Yeah.
listening is also wanting to learn more about it. To get the basics right,
Yeah.
based on what I heard, is that you have to be logically looking at what the other person is thinking and be understanding of what the logical flow of things. But then why is it so late for something this to be picked up, right? Because if logic is being talked about, isn't that what leaders usually pick up, right? First thing.
Well, you would think, but the problem is that we don't really teach our leaders very well. I mean, you think about most MBA programs, even top, Masters of Business Administration, they might
Mhm.
get a class in leadership, maybe. So most of us pick up our leadership by watching the other people around us.
Yeah.
Now, if the people you're watching aren't using cognitive empathy and don't know what it is, then
Hmm.
how are you going to learn that? There's not much in the literature about it. It's something that people aren't really, we've been talking about empathy a lot for about the last 10 years, but actually understanding there are different kinds. I mean, this is something that's super brand new.
Hmm.
So, leaders aren't necessarily going to come to the table with these skills. But I
Uh-huh.
use the word skills for a reason.
Yeah.
Learning cognitive empathy is a skill. It's not something you're
Okay.
born with. It's something you can practice and build.
Hmm.
So my goal is to get it out there to help these leaders understand that, yeah, I have all these tools at my disposal and I
Hmm.
didn't even know about them.
Okay, so if I had to take a baby step into trying to practice my cognitive empathy, right, what would that one baby step be? Right, and then probably I'll see where I can go.
Sure. So the first step, and just like any learning, you want to start easy because you want to start with
Yes.
baby steps.
Yeah.
Start by taking the perspective of the other person, but be sure you're doing it through their eyes. Don't look at their perspective through your own eyes, through your own experiences, through your own evolution. Try to look at it through theirs. And that's a step that a lot of people find difficult. But once they get a hold of it and they practice it, it becomes a lot easier.
Hmm.
Because my experiences and what I've done in my life and where I've been and what I've done is going to be completely different than yours. So I need to be able to see it through your eyes, not through mine.
Hmm. Okay, now It's just coming through to my mind right at this point, because the first definition that I heard of empathy was basically trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and feel what they're feeling, right? Um,
Mhm.
to be empathetic. Now, you're talking about looking at things from their perspective. Can you just help me differentiate how things are different?
It's not different necessarily because if I'm walking in your shoes, then I'm seeing your path through your eyes. It's
Hmm.
different than me walking behind you, right? And
Hmm.
seeing your path, but through my own eyes. If I'm
Uh-huh.
in your shoes, I'm seeing your path through your eyes.
Uh-huh. I, yeah, that definitely makes a difference. And but that's where sympathy and empathy are different, right? I mean, I look at your problem from my own lens and then feel like bad for you. But then when I look at your problem from your own lens, I feel probably I'm grateful or just stuck in a situation, right? That's how things need to be solved when it comes to leadership, because I guess that's where the whole empathy thing comes in.
Right. And that's why sympathy is actually taken negatively in a lot of places. In a
Hmm.
lot of hospitals and medical programs, they're taught not to use sympathy because since you're seeing it through your own eyes, there can be an element of judgment. And if you're a
Yes.
patient and you're in the hospital on the worst day of your life, the last thing you want is someone approaching you with judgment. Even if it's well intended, it still ends up being negative.
Hmm.
So that's why these medical professionals are taught empathy instead of sympathy.
Hmm. Now, in the corporate scenario, right, where there is
Mhm.
a lot of judgment and there is a lot of uh, putting grades on things that you're doing, right? Isn't it
Yeah.
detrimental when you're doing a performance review? Say a performance review. It's just sometimes cliches come first thing in my mind. You're doing a performance review and you're sitting there to judge as a leader, right, or as a manager per se. Um, how
Yeah.
helpful is it to be empathetic in that situation?
See, I think again, we have to be careful with definitions because if you're talking judgment,
Hmm.
judgment means that I'm deciding that this is the case and I'm putting a value on it.
Yeah.
I'm judging someone as good or as bad or that kind of thing.
Hmm.
When you're dealing with the performance evaluations and working with employees or clients or whatever, what you actually want to look for is critique. You want things to be better. You want to logically look at this employee has done this and this. They could perhaps do this and this better. But then at the end of that sentence, you're not saying, and that makes them a bad employee. You're saying these are the things that can be improved. These are the things we can work on together. Maybe even it comes down to this isn't a great fit for this employee, and we need them to go somewhere where they can do better and have the right environment.
Hmm.
So I would say to be very careful because judgment isn't good. Critique is very good. It allows you to
Yeah.
grow and get better and learn. But
Hmm.
judgment can be really negative.
Talking about judgment, there's another place. I mean, since we're talking about the corporate network, right? Just talking about
Mhm.
LinkedIn, where you can judge a lot of people for what they're doing and the business that they do, right? So,
Yeah.
so on that platform, everybody's there to either show off or talk about or sell something. I don't know. These days, it's just either show off or selling. So,
Yeah,
but
it
when it
seems to
comes,
be sometimes.
yeah, and when it comes to selling, the first thing that they talk about for trying to generate this empathy or sympathy is that they'll talk about, oh, I failed on this, and then there's this whole story, right? The process of sales where you try to build trust by showing that, yeah, I failed at this, and then I built this, and to create so much as a solution, this empathetic relation that is created out of the blue by a simple story in the sales process. um, can leaders actually be taught to do that on a regular basis to build teams like that? I mean, sell a story and then build motivation using that.
Absolutely. That's cognitive empathy at its core, because you're actually saying, this is a place where I was vulnerable or I had a problem. And we're relating to one another on that level. I can understand where you're coming from because it's also where I came from.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's talk about how I was able to fix it for myself, and I might be able to help you too.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's the I don't know, textbook definition of a sales pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. If
Um,
it's done well, absolutely. The key is sincerity. You have to
yeah.
be, people can see through it if you're sincerely wanting to help and make that connection as opposed to just wanting to make a sale.
Yeah, but it's just that how these platforms are designed, right? You're trying to
Yeah.
write through a full story, but then you will probably see a certain gap and feel that this full story is made up and just for the sake of trying to build trust. As a salesperson, is it possible to, I mean, what gap should you be looking at to fill first if you're trying to sell a story per se?
Well, I think first of all, you can't look at it as selling. It has to
Mm.
be authentic. We talk about authentic leadership, right?
Yeah.
Transformational leadership, servant leadership, authentic leadership, and a whole bunch of others. If this comes off as inauthentic, that
Uh-huh.
it isn't real, it isn't a real story, that I'm using all AI to write it, that I'm just trying to dig into a soft spot on somebody else, then that comes off as insincere and people don't want to know about it because you're not actually making that human to human connection. You're
Uh-huh.
going through the motions of what you think will do it, but you're not actually doing it. So you
Yeah.
have to actually take a step back and say, what is authentic to me? What's real to me? What might even be a little vulnerable or scary, but will actually help me serve my clients? Now
Mhm.
we're into servant leadership. Because again, if it's just out to make a quick buck, nobody cares. There's too many people out there selling that do want to make human connection and seriously want to help. And those
Mhm.
are the salespeople that I want to work with, the ones that are absolutely authentic and really want to help me progress my goal, which in turn means that I can help them progress theirs.
Um, we're talking about servant leadership and sales pitches, right? It's just that, mm, yeah, sometimes leaders don't look at it, don't want to look at that aspect, right, of being vulnerable to their peers or juniors, right, or the people they're trying
Yeah.
to influence. Why is it so? What is the myth that is stuck in their mind that being vulnerable will probably make them lose their leadership stance or something of that sort? Is there a myth
They,
that needs to be removed, right?
yep. They think it makes them weak. They
Yeah.
think that it shows weakness when in reality it's the exact opposite.
Mhm.
Because to show vulnerability actually takes great strength.
Mhm.
And this goes all the way back to Brene Brown. She's been talking about it since like 2009, how vulnerability is not weak in any way, but it's a persistent myth. I mean,
Uh-huh.
2009 to 2025, 16 years later, and it's still hanging around out there.
Mhm. And what's keeping this myth together? Is there the stories built around it, or it's just perception that's sticky for the past few centuries? Uh, where is it stemming from?
A lot of it is cultural. I mean,
Mhm.
same thing. People are brought up into these leadership positions by watching other leaders, and they learn in certain ways, and you get these mental ideas and thoughts that go through your mind over and over and over. Well,
Mhm.
once you learn something and this becomes that ingrained, then it's really hard to get rid of unless you actively say, no, this doesn't make me weak. I can be vulnerable. That doesn't mean, as my friend would say, emptying your purse on the floor and like dumping every
Yeah.
vulnerability in the world out there.
Yeah.
That's not it at all. But understanding the things that make us human. I
Mhm.
mean, at the beginning and end of the day, the things that make us human are the hard things, the
Yeah.
difficult things, the things that, really rip up our lives. We can relate to each other human to human on that level. I don't know anyone who hasn't had to go through something.
Mhm.
So why not use that human to human? Because it's how we're built. It's what we're meant to do.
Mhm. Uh, one more thing, probably, which I could add is that when we look up to a leader, right? If you're looking up to somebody, probably the first thing that we know about them was their accomplishments. the good things that
Right.
they've done to get into that leadership position. And we have no clue the hardships or the vulnerabilities that they've had through the whole journey. And
Yeah.
the only picture that we have is that they're there because they're great performers and they had no signs of weaknesses and something of that sort. And it just gets ingrained while you're getting onto that path, right? Despite the fact that you
Yeah.
will have your own difficulties and hardships getting into that same position, but then you don't know- tell anybody what you failed at because everybody's just looking at what you're good at.
Yeah.
And
And I think that's a fantastic point. Yeah.
so, okay, now before I close, I am sorry I did not ask you earlier, what have you been doing and how do you help others? What do you do?
So right now I'm an author and a speaker. My book came out in July and we've hit Amazon bestseller in two categories in four countries.
Mhm.
So the UK, Canada, the US, and Australia. And it's called The Empathic Leader: How EQ via Empathy Transforms Leadership for Better Profit, Productivity, and Innovation. And it's really catching on because it's basically everything I've been talking about just in book form, specifically for leaders as a handbook.
Uh-huh.
I also do speaking. My TEDx just came out about a month and a half ago, and we're at 60,000 views, which is fantastic because that means
Yeah.
that people want to hear this message of self-empathy.
Hmm.
And I'm doing other speaking and that sort of thing right now. I'm working on book two, and it is a full-time job.
Right. Okay. And yeah, where can people get in touch with you? Just so probably I will get back to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. The best place to find me is on my website, and that's EQ Via, and that's V as in Victor, IA, empathy. And you can contact me there. You can, I have a newsletter. You can sign up for there. Whatever you want to use me to speak, there's a contact form. I'm on all the social medias, especially LinkedIn, so you can always reach out and DM me there. And I have my own podcast called The Empathic Leader. So that's where I actually talk about leadership and empathy and emotional intelligence.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Your Lab Central. I'm sure a lot of leaders will be looking at what you've been talking about and this conversation in particular, right? A lot of help when it comes to empathy. So, to those who've been listening till now, I'm sure you liked what we talked about. So, please leave a like. The comment section is open for questions, perspectives, any suggestions, or whatever you liked about this conversation. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe before you close the window itself. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.